I think it was the voices and the people that were walking alongside me that extended me compassion, that over time allowed me to start being compassionate towards myself.
Welcome to Permission Slips, a space to practice paying compassionate attention to your life so you can experience the wholeness, purpose, and joy you were made for. I'm Jillian DeBritz, a life and leadership coach and a recovering perfectionist, learning alongside you how to give myself permission to be human. I'm so glad you're here with me for this conversation with my friend Michelle Konson. Michelle is a writer and a speaker who's passionate about helping women find hope as they embrace the fullness of their stories. Michelle, I'm so happy to have you here.
I couldn't be more grateful and joyful to be here today.
Well, Michelle and I met less than a year ago, and so our friendship is relatively new in the span of our life, and yet it feels like we have known each other forever. We met at a writing conference in June. We went to Chicago for the Write to Publish conference, where we both went to grow our writing skill and learn about the publishing industry. And we're quick to connect over tearful conversation, if I remember correctly. And my love for Michelle was instant because, Michelle, you are such a vulnerable, deep, authentic woman who has done real, deep, hard work in your own life to become more and more fully who you're made to be. And so I'm just excited for people to get to know you.
I will just say that I knew that you were going to be someone special in my life. Probably 2 minutes after I met you. I don't know if you remember, but you drove up to me. I was walking and you drove up to me frantic and rolled down your window and you're like, do you know when the check-in is? And I had just earlier that day when I checked in, spent a lot of time trying to find the check-in. And so I very intimately identified with your struggle. And I was like, yes, I do. And I struggle too. And so I explained to you exactly where it was. And you looked at me and you said, Michelle. And you said, I can see it from your name tag. I'm not stalking you. You said, Michelle, my name is Jillian and I want to get to know you. And I don't know, and I'm getting teary as I say this, I don't know that anyone else has ever pursued me that intent within such a short period of time. And I was like, I have to find her later. It just felt like a divine appointment, and it felt like I have to find you. I have to seek you out. Like, yes, we have to get to know each other.
I just love what a picture that story is of our friendship, right? From the first second, it's like, help, I'm struggling. Can you help me? And you said, and this has been really the essence of our story, yes, I'm with you. I'm struggling too, or I struggled too. I've been there. You're going to be okay. We'll get through it together. Some version of that vulnerable help and permission, right, for both of us, and permission just to be honest and real exactly where we are. So I love that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when we did meet later that night after the first session, I mean, it was one of those conversations where it was like, me too. Yes. Me too. Me too. No way. It just, the ways our stories connected and collided, it was uncanny. And it did just seem like such a divine appointment to put that out there, that the moment that we've met. And you were right, even though we've only known each other in terms of time for a relatively short time, like I feel like we have gone so deep on so many things. And we don't even live in the same city. We live on opposite coasts. I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast. And yet we have been able to encourage one another and hold one another up and, hold one another's burdens and trials. And from that distance, it's just been remarkable. So I am so grateful.
Me too, Michelle. And thank you for highlighting the gift of our friendship over the miles, and the depth of friendship that we have cultivated. It's been such a gift to me. And as we even talked kind of before we started recording, I think that's the gift that I want to give to our friends that are listening, is this picture of what's possible in friendship, that it is possible to be deeply known and deeply loved in a way that is truly healing. I feel like my heart is healed a little bit more every time we talk. Truly, it almost sounds too good to be true, but it's my lived experience is that I feel a little more whole every time we talk. And that's because I am free to bring all of myself. And because you do the same, there's that mutual vulnerability. And because you so beautifully accept and affirm and love all of me generously with your words, not just with your presence, which is also a gift, but because you are so intentional about naming and affirming and honoring my story, it makes me feel safe and truly welcomed as I am fully. And so I want people to know that that's possible, that it's not a fluke. It's not, in some ways, it's almost like a learned skill that all of us have the opportunity to be invited into relationships that are what we all long for, to be deeply known and deeply loved. And that the outcome of that, we met at this writing conference, but the outcome of feeling so seen, so safe, so known by you is that I feel more and more courage to do the work that I believe God's made me to do in the world, including this podcast. This is a perfect example. I mean, here you are with me. We were talking beforehand about how, I'm coming with fear and trembling. I don't know what I'm doing. I just want to have conversations with people and invite others to listen in and to learn with me and grow alongside me and be curious with me about the places in our own lives that maybe God's inviting us to go a little deeper or to get a little bit more curious about what's holding us back. And so we do that together in our real life. I'm so glad that you brought that up, as the way our friendship has been so deeply vulnerable. It's cultivated a beauty and a kindredness between us that it's truly a gift.
Yeah, well, I am just so honored to be sitting with you here recording. Because I remember just, from when we met that you were like, I feel like God's calling me to speak, and I feel like God's calling me to start a podcast. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do it. And here you are doing it. You're doing the hard work. You're doing the things you've been called to do. And it's just been such a joy to watch, and to watch you do it scared, right? And that's such a gift to me. I'm like, okay, so I'm scared in all these big areas of my life. But Jillian can do it. So can I. I can do these big, scary things too. And I think that's just been a hallmark of our friendship. And, we would be remiss to not mention that our dear friend Jenny, who is going to be on here very, very, very soon. Jenny, Jillian, and I are in a Marco Polo group. And honestly, just watching Jenny and Jillian just do things that they have been called to do that they are scared to do because they're new and they're not comfortable. They're not things that they've done before. It has honestly just been such a fuel for me to be like, okay, I can do it too. Yeah. If they can do it, I can do it too. And they're with me and they're right by my side and they're encouraging me. So yeah, it's the greatest gift.
And just to highlight again, not to be redundant here, but I feel the courage. I'm trembling, right? But I feel the courage to show up here because you said, I'll do it with you. Jillian, yes, I will sit with you. I told you and Jenny over Marco Polo, I don't know where to start. I'm stuck. I feel insecure. I feel too vulnerable. Like, who's going to want to listen to my words? And for you to say, I'll help you practice. I'll help you. Like, let's just do it together. Knowing that I wanted to share about our friendship. For you to say, yes, this is something you're called to do. I see this in you. I see this. You're right. You're not just making this up. But for you to say, no, Jillian, I'm coming with you. I'm willing to make time and space. This calling matters. So hearing that kind of fear and trembling inside me, that calling that I felt brave enough because of our vulnerability and safety in our friendship to share with you, to share that, and then to hear you reflect back and affirm, yes, this matters. Keep going is the only thing that has got me to this place of saying, yes, I'll record. So again, I just think there's such power in, as we are fully known by one another, fully loved by one another, fully seen by one another, it allows us to walk with courage and freedom into the things that are designed for us to do by God, the things that bring us life and meaning and joy.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to talk about with you too, because you're walking your own brave journey and you're doing your own hard work. So talk about your writing journey and your speaking journey and kind of what that has been like for you.
Yeah. I'll backtrack a little because I couldn't give you a full answer on that without giving you some history on, what I'm even writing and speaking about. Yeah. So probably, a little over 10 years ago now, I think it got to the point where life wasn't working anymore. The cracks were really starting to show, and I thought I was in control up until that point. But I got to the point where I was like, I'm really not in control. My life is falling apart around me. I had 4 kids and older teens and lots of big life stuff happens in those years. Marriage can be hard. And, I got to the point where I just wasn't coping anymore. And I had to take a real hard look and say, what's going on here? What am I doing? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to carry on. I'm not sure. I'm not going to be able to carry on the way I'm going. And so it started a journey of speaking to some counselors and some trusted friends and starting to delve into my story and do some story work, which is basically looking at your childhood years mostly and your upbringing and your relationship with your primary caregivers and how that has molded and shaped you into who you are today and how that was impacting my relationships, the decisions I was making, where I was finding myself, my thoughts, just so much. And through that process, I started realizing that, well, no, I'm not in control. I never was. But that control was something that I used to survive when I was younger, because my home life growing up was pretty chaotic, that as long as I can control the little sphere that was around me, I felt like I was going to be okay. And as I grew up, that little sphere became my husband and my children. And so as long as I could control that and everything was okay inside there, I could be okay. But as we all know, life happens. And again, raising kids and being married, those are relationships that are hard. They're intimate. We bear all. They see everything. We see one another in our worst states. And we just can't cover up and hide. And so I think I realized that as much as control had worked for me for a long time, and it wasn't that it was wrong, right? When you're young, you need those survival mechanisms. Control had worked for me for a long time, but it just wasn't working anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I start dismantling the mechanisms that I'd put into place that were not working for me anymore and start realizing, okay, wait a minute, what is actually going on here? How can I start healing? How can I start building strong foundations? How can I actually being healthy in my relationships? And to do that, I had to delve back into my childhood. And so long story short, lots of work done. And through that, I have realized lots of things that I have done wrong. And, again, given our primary relationships with our kids and our husbands, like that's where most of the stuff went down, right? And so I have come to realize that I have sinned greatly against my own children and my husband. And God has been so gracious and kind in being slow and gentle to reveal those things to me. But also he's been kind in revealing them to me. And I'm so grateful. And so I think I felt called a few years ago to start writing about this journey and particularly about the ways that I had harmed my children. And as my children became older, I started speaking to some of them about some of the things I was discovering and started going back to them and asking their forgiveness for things I learned that I had done. Obviously, I didn't do them intentionally, but I still did them, right? I've learned that even though you don't do something intentionally, doesn't mean that you haven't done it. And that those were still actions of mine, and that I harmed my children through a lot of my control mechanisms and survival strategies that I built up. And so I've just felt like God's been calling me to write and speak about those things to encourage others and to let them know it's not too late and it's okay. And there is no guilt and shame there because we are all human, which means we are all sinners. And that means we're going to sin against the people around us, especially those close to us. That's okay, because by Jesus dying, he gave us the greatest gift in being able to ask for forgiveness. Because he forgives us, we're now able to do the same with those around us. And so, yeah, I really just felt like calling me to give hope and encouragement to those around me that needed to hear it and know that it's not too late. And sometimes that redemption is even sweeter than if things had worked out perfectly the first time around.
Right. What a beautiful picture of what we know to be true, what the research shows as parents, that we only have to be good enough parents 30% of the time. And the rest of the time, it's how we repair the ruptures between us and our kids that actually builds a secure attachment, which we know is the basis for our security the rest of our lives. And so for you to model that, even as your kids have grown and they weren't in the younger years as you started this work, for you to model what you just said, that it's not too late. It's never too late. There's such freedom and beauty in that.
Yeah. And I want to be honest and real and say it's not that everything just got pretty and better overnight, right? Because that's not reality in real life either. There is still a lot that I'm discovering and learning about myself, and I will continue to do that until the day God calls me home. And there are still many conversations to be had, and there is still a lot of ruptures to be repaired, some that I'm aware of and some that I don't even know about yet. So it's a process for sure, and it's not a one and done deal, and things don't change overnight. But there is still hope. Yeah. There is still goodness, and there's redemption and restoration, even the smallest of steps. And so that's really what I want people to know. I don't want to paint a picture of, and then everything was awesome and we lived happily ever after, because that's not reality either, right? And we hear those stories and that's not our lived experience, then we think that we must be doing something wrong, right? Something's wrong with me, that hasn't happened in my life. That's not, I don't believe that happens for most of us.
Right. Yeah, redemption is slow, hard work by the grace of God. And I hear you talking about, like, that's the whole point for people of faith in Jesus. Like, that's something that we talk about, where we can't redeem ourselves. We actually can't fix our own brokenness. Like, that's the whole point of what we call the gospel, the good news, that Jesus came because he knew that we were stuck. He knew that our brokenness was too deep. And so for you to say, yeah, this work of allowing him to redeem and heal first my own story and then my story and my relationship with my own kids, it's slow and it's messy and it's a divine work of grace. And it's not something that happens overnight. Like, that's real. That's real. We can relate to that. I can't relate to people saying, yeah, say these words. Here's this formula. I mean, I want the formula. I want it to be quick and easy and, predictable and not risky. I want someone to say, do this, and this will be the result in your parenting. Everything will be fine. But real life doesn't have those kind of guarantees. And I hear you saying, even without the guarantees and even with the mess, it's still worth it. So I'm wondering, for people who are like, yeah, I don't want to repeat what I experienced. I don't want to wound anyone in my life, right? None of us want to wound intentionally the people in our lives, whether that's friends or spouses or children. But you were talking about this reality that whether we intend to or not, there's still ruptures that are going to happen between us. So how did you start to identify what some of those places were where you had unintentionally hurt the people that you loved, your kids specifically in this case? How did you identify what those places were?
Yeah. So, again, I had really, experienced really great counselors to walk alongside me and to help me see things that I couldn't see. But also, I would say, and any of us that are parents could attest to this, kids are great teachers. And our kids tell the truth. And when your kids start telling you things over and over again, in the beginning, you can deny it and you can defend it. But if you're in a position where you're willing to hear and you start hearing the same things over and over again, it becomes pretty obvious. And so I think being willing to listen without being defensive, that was a huge thing for me, because I grew up with a dad who was narcissistic and, gaslit everyone in our family. And so I learned to be very defensive, even if it wasn't straight to his face, which I realized wasn't worth it towards the end, because of either the payback from doing that. But to myself and to others, I started defending, that's not true. That's not what I do. That's not true. And so I became very good at being defensive. And sometimes that was good, right? Because a lot of what he was saying wasn't true. But I think I became overly defensive. So that was a real tendency of mine. And so I needed to stop defending myself and start really listening And again, when you start hearing the same thing over and over again, eventually you're like, okay, wait a minute. Is that true? Is there some truth in that? Is it here? Am I the problem here? Am I the one who's not listening? Because when you're defending, you constantly think everyone else is the problem, right? Everyone else is wrong. And so, I think it took a lot of humility. And again, the Lord was so gracious in granting that to me because I didn't have that initially. I think I started realizing that I had not let my children feel their emotions because I had not been able to feel mine. And so I didn't know what it was like to let people feel their emotions, first of all, because I'd never seen it modeled and I'd never experienced it. But also I think I was really deeply fearful of not knowing what to do with big emotions. I didn't feel like I could fix them. And so, when my kids came to me with big emotions, my tendency was to tell them everything was okay. Or they were making too big a deal over something, or they needed to just do X, Y, and Z to solve the problem or to get better. Because I didn't know how to deal with those big emotions.
And that was your way of controlling the environment.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And so that was a really big one, and one that I started uncovering. And I think back over and over again. I remember a situation where my kids were younger and I'm like, oh my goodness, I did it. I did it there. Look what I did. And again, God is so kind, and it's not with condemnation and it's not with judgment, but it's really just with kindness on, yeah, you did that and it's okay. You're forgiven. But let's look at what we can do about it now. Wow. And one of the stories that really has come to mind recently on that is, my oldest daughter, Chloe. Chloe has big emotions. It's a great trait. She feels things deeply. You put that with a mom who's never really known how to feel big emotions. And yeah, that's inevitably going to, have a train wreck at some point, right? Lots of train wrecks. But, I think when she was younger, I used to very much try and control and damp down those big emotions. I was reminded she got married almost a couple of years ago now. But a couple of days before her wedding, her husband-to-be Joel has a big head of, beautiful curls. And Chloe loves those curls. And she had not let Joel get a haircut for quite a while before the wedding because she wanted him to have a strong head of curls on their wedding day as she walked down the aisle to him. And so my husband, Mickey, was going to take Joel to get a haircut. Mickey was going to get a haircut. Joel was going to get a haircut. They were going to do this a couple of days before the wedding. And Chloe sent tons of pictures on exactly what she wanted Joel to look like on that day. I went to the hairdresser and we were getting our nails done at the same time. And Joel sent Chloe a picture of when they came out of the barber, and it was barely any hair on his head. And she saw the picture and she started crying. I was like, well, maybe it's not as bad. Let's just wait till we see Joel in person. Photos they're not always that accurate. And I just felt this lump in my throat and just this rock in my stomach. I was like, oh, it looks pretty short. Anyway, and so we did get to see Joel a couple hours later, and yeah, there was not much hair left on his head. He had a pretty decent haircut. And so Chloe started crying. She was really upset. This was, again, in the grand scheme of things, not something that important, but it was something that meant a lot to her.
Yeah.
And, and everyone was telling her, Chloe looks great. Joel looks great. And it was a great haircut. He did look great. And I think a few years ago, I would have very easily just jumped on that bandwagon and said, Chloe, it's okay. He looks great. Just accept that he looks great. And even though he doesn't have the curls, he still looks great. Photos are going to be great. All is good. Let's check that box. Let's move on to the next thing. And we were sitting in her room and, she was crying. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I would have done that a few years ago. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tell her that he looks great and everything's okay, because it's not okay for her right now. Clearly, this is not okay for her. And so I took her hand and I led her by the hand all the way down to our basement. And we have a punching bag in the basement. And we used to let our son, when he was younger, get out some energy down there whenever he needed to. To the basement, go punch it, get some energy out. And I'd never used it. So I was like, Chloe, this punching bag is the hairdresser. And we're going to let him know how we feel about Joel's hair. And I gave it the biggest fistful of my Mama Bear energy. And it really hurt.
I'm sure.
Never done this before. that hurts. I don't know how to do this. But and we just started punching the punching bag together, and we were crying and then laughing, and we were just hitting that punching bag, and it was glorious. And I realized that I hadn't controlled her emotions. I had validated them, and I had met her in them. And it was a really sweet moment. And I realized that I was able to do that because other people had done that with and for me. I could now offer her that gift because I had finally received it. Finally knew what it was like for people to hear me be sad and to be sad with me, and not to tell me it was all okay and I was going to be okay and I didn't need to be sad anymore. For people to say, I am so sad, that breaks my heart. And to see tears falling from other people's eyes, to see, Kurt Thompson talks about this, about how our brains are literally rewired when we tell our stories to empathetic listeners. Yeah. And I have experienced that over my journey of working with counselors and good friends and being in a confessional community, being in a group therapy session, because I had experienced those things. I was now able to offer that gift.
Yeah. What a beautiful, beautiful story. That's a powerful picture of what it can look like to create space for the emotions of the people we love. Like you said, not to try to squash them or make them go away because we're uncomfortable, which is often what happens, right? We feel uncomfortable with other people's emotions. We just want to stop it, stop being sad. Oh, it's too hard. I don't know what to do. But for you to literally bring her to a space where her emotions were welcomed and you allowed her to release them, and you not just like told her to go punch and stood back, and watched her, but that you entered in and engaged at the same time, sharing your anger over what happened to her. I mean, to Joel, which happened to her. For you to be in that space with her, literally getting it out on that punching bag, that's a beautiful picture. I love that story, Michelle. And so much as you're sharing, there's so many things that are striking me. Well, first of all, I knew that we were destined to be friends when we shared our mutual appreciation and in the way that Kurt Thompson's work has impacted both of us. People who know me know that his work has been deeply formational and what happens in our brains and our neurobiology in the context of our relationships with other people. And as you shared about, I was able to give this to her because other people have done this for me. I've allowed other people, I've learned how to receive from other people the care in the midst of my own emotions, be it sadness or anger or whatever the emotion is, through a counselor, through a confessional community, which we'll have to talk about that on another episode because I think that would be a really fun conversation to have for people who want to know what a confessional community is. It's essentially a group of people who have committed to hold space for one another's stories in a really beautiful way. And through your own journey, your own story work, for you to receive the support and care from other people, not in isolation, not reflecting on your story and going back to your childhood and thinking about the places that you had to control things in order to survive. You weren't doing that work in isolation. You were doing that work in the safety of relationships with other people who were equipped, who had either gone before you or had the training or who were committed to doing it with you at the same time. And that then built the emotional bandwidth, or, Andy Kolber and others in the therapy realm would say the window of tolerance to be able to withstand your own emotional experience in a way that allowed her Chloe to have her own. And in so doing, you were able to give her comfort that I'm sure was exactly what she needed.
I think I found that a lot too. Like if I have space, and it's okay for me to feel things, like even though those things don't change, circumstances don't change. I think just bearing witness to the fact that I feel this and it's okay. And I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in this. And somebody else sees me and knows me in this. That means so much more.
Yeah. And that's what's been so healing in our friendship is someone sees me and knows me and I'm not alone. So you've been that person for me as well, because you've received that from others. You've been able to offer that to me, and I know to Jenny and so many people in your life, Michelle. And something that really strikes me as you share, and I know people listening are experiencing and noticing the same thing, is you have such humility and I even hear a lot of self-compassion your willingness to be curious about your own story, because it would be really easy to blame your dad or your upbringing, or the things that happened to you as a kid, and to stay defensive, to stay in that posture of defensiveness and self-protection. You are modeling such an openness and a curiosity that took a lot of courage. Like, it's actually not easy to pay attention to ourselves with that level of honesty, where we're willing to say, where have I first hurt others? Where have I passed on brokenness, my own brokenness, to my kids and to my husband and to people I care about? That's really painful to even look at those things. So that takes a lot of courage. And then also to be curious about where those necessary strategies for survival as a kid that need to control your environment, being curious about where those came from instead of shaming yourself. I don't hear shame. I don't hear you saying, of course, I've controlled everything since I was a kid and now I'm still controlling. Like, I don't hear shame in your voice and as you're sharing about that. And so I'm wondering where for you that came from, the ability to be curious and brave as you went back to do the work of looking at your own story. How were you able to stay open?
Yeah, I can't take the credit. I really can't. It's not like I, 12 years ago, went into a counselor's office and was like, I am open and vulnerable. This to me, everything I need to know. Like, I had no idea where this journey was going to take me, right? I was just struggling and life was just not going well for me. And I had hit many brick walls. And so I think I arrived at the start of this journey very desperate. And I think I had finally realized that what I was doing wasn't working. So that's one thing. It wasn't like I was trying to hold on to the way I'd done things before, because I realized that's not working anymore. That is very clearly not working. I've tried for 4 decades here, and that's not working anymore. I don't think it's ever worked, but for a while I thought it was, and I was holding on. So again, I didn't come, being like, everything I've done is wrong and I just need new ways. And, I certainly didn't come by it that way. I came just from an absolute place of desperation. And again, I think it was the voices and the people that were walking alongside me that extended me compassion, that over time allowed me to start being compassionate towards myself, which I was not, and I'm still not a lot of the time, right? I've gotten a lot better, but I was not compassionate. I was incredibly hard on myself. Those voices inside your head of you're so stupid, of why did you do that again? Of can't you see that doesn't work? Of better. You should have done better. You should have been better. All those voices, like there were lots of those voices. And so, I've gotten better at listening to those voices. I think for the longest time they were there and I didn't even hear them, which is crazy, right? That we have these voices in our head. That are there all the time, right? We speak to ourselves. I recently heard someone say we speak to ourselves more than we speak to anyone else, but we often don't hear those voices even though we're listening. And so, it took me a long time to start even just being able to hear them and then starting to identify, oh, wait a minute. No, that wasn't stupid. That was because of something that happened to me. Or no, me doing that wasn't, it was exactly what I had to learn to do to survive. Like I had to start learning to hear those voices. And so I think the short answer is I have learned to be far more compassionate to myself because others have been compassionate towards me. I'm like, but they were able to be compassionate towards me. Can I do that to myself? And you really can. And it's a learned skill. And but it does take intentionality and practice and time. And and you spoke about how do you start looking back at your story? How do you be brave and courageous enough? And again, I think I was in a place of desperation. So for me, there wasn't any other way. Like I just had to go there. I had to start delving into the spaces that were hard and painful, that I had shut up for way too long, that I had numbed for way too long. I had to go into those spaces if I wanted any form of healing and I wanted to get better. But I think there's a lot of hesitation in going back. We don't want to dredge up the past, right? Because we spend so long putting the past in the past and being like, okay, that's behind me. I survived. I made it. Now let's move on to other things, right? We want to leave those things in the past. But I think we do ourselves a real disservice because those things are not gone. Even if they're in our past, as far as the timeline goes, they're still with us. You hear a lot of wise voices in the space nowadays. Again, Kurt Thompson, we've already spoken about it, Adam Young. And Adam Young says we literally, until we learn to deal with our past, we will live as much in the past as in the present. And that was just, eye-opening for me. I was like, okay, so even if I'm thinking I'm living in the present, if I'm not working through those things, I'm really not moving forward. And he speaks about how our brains and neurons connect through genes and through life experiences, and how formative our life experiences are as kids. And we can't change until we change those neural connections in our brains. And of course, we can't change genes, but we can look at life experiences and we can look at how they have shaped and formed us. And only by looking at those and by then starting to address them and starting to share those stories, empathetic listeners, do our neurons start connecting differently. And that is the only way for us to heal and for us to do things differently going forward and for us to change. And I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of fear also about us being worried about blaming our parents, which is a place where a lot of wounding happens because we're so young, so many developmental connections are made. And I recently just read a beautiful quote by Becky Allender, Dan Allender's wife, who has a very painful story, but has worked through it so beautifully. And she said, acknowledging the harmful behavior of my parents did not lessen my love for them. In fact, I think I love my parents more today than ever before. And I think, we're afraid to supposedly blame our parents, but blame comes with a posture of contempt and accusation. And I think by naming our realities, we're not blaming. We're actually just naming a reality. And I think we do ourselves a huge disservice by not being willing to name the reality and to work through it and to move forward. I think that, there's just a lot of guilt and shame involved there, and, in saying our parents did the best they could, and, the past is the past. But I don't believe that we can move forward. And I don't think that we would be dwelling on the past. I think we're actually working through the past so that we can live a different future.
That's beautiful. Wow. So as we name the truth of our stories, it does allow us not to live in the past, but to live fully in the present and to create a different future. That's hopeful.
Yeah, totally. Right?
As we wrap up, I'm wondering if you were to quickly give some advice to someone who's like, I want to do this. I want to do this story work. Where would you tell them? How would you tell them to get started?
Yeah. So I would say one of the biggest things, and we've alluded to it a few times today, is not to do this work alone, right? We were not meant to do anything alone, and doing things alone is hard and lonely, and it's not fruitful. We weren't made to be alone. God is Trinity. There's relationship right there, and we're created in the image of God. And so I would say don't do any of this work alone. Find either a trusted counselor in your area or online, or a good friend or mentor, or find a storywork group. But there are lots of places where you can start storywork just in a group and just start really exploring what does story even mean? What is my story? What impact has it had on me? I don't really understand, but I want to look more into this. So starting either with an individual or with a story group. There are also books to read. There is To Be Told by Dan Allender. And then I'm super excited. Adam Young has his first book on storywork coming out in March. There are lots of Kurt Thompson's Anatomy of the Soul. There are lots of books that you could read and then podcasts. But ultimately, don't do this work alone, and head into this work with great compassion for yourself. And really just be open to what the Lord, will show you. He wants us to be healed and whole. And I believe that's our journey, right? Is being more sanctified, to become more like Jesus and lead into Him, ask Him to guide and lead you. But absolutely, don't do it alone, and reach out to some wise voices in this space.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so hopeful. I feel filled with hope just hearing that reminder that, one, we're not made to do any of this work alone. We can't heal alone. We can't go back and give ourselves compassion alone. We need to receive that from others. And also, that's a picture of God's design for us, that His vision for us is that we become more and more whole, where nothing is missing, nothing is broken, and where we have freedom from shame and fullness of compassion, where we can receive that fully from him and from others. And you're such a beautiful example of that it's possible and it's real. This isn't just something we're making up and hoping for, but that you've done the hard, gritty, brave work and continue to do that work every day. I'm watching you. I'm in it with you, of practicing self-compassion and curiosity and openness to the process of allowing God to show you more and more where he wants to bring restoration. So thank you for sharing your story with us and putting you on the spot here. If you were to give people a permission slip, something that you would want them to hold on to from our conversation, what permission slip would you give people?
I think I would give people permission to be kind to their story, and not to enter it with judgment. Because I think if you start doing it in kindness, you get a picture of how God sees us and how God holds our stories. And I think that gives us the ability to actually move forward, which we know that guilt and shame and judgment don't do. They stop us in our tracks. But I think kindness just, opens the door for us to be gentle with ourselves, which I know you're really big on. But yeah, to be really gentle with ourselves and to give ourselves space and compassion. So yeah, permission to be kind. Yeah, Julian, I just want to thank you for the permission that you've given me to be more fully me, to step into my story, and that it is a good story. And often we kind of sort of know these things, but it's by other people giving us space and allowing us to live that out with them that really strengthens that belief in us. And you've been one of those people in my life. So I just want to thank you for that. And I am so excited for this journey that you're on. And I can't wait for everyone to hear more from you. And I will, for one, be listening, of course, and waiting for every new episode to drop. Yeah, just deeply love you.
Thank you. I love you too. Thank you for this gift and this journey that we're on together. So friends, as you're listening, there is your permission to be kind to yourself and to your story and to embrace the fullness of everything that you've experienced and to believe that it's not too late, that redemption is possible, and that wholeness is waiting for you. You can find Michelle at her website, michellekonson.com, or on Instagram at Michelle Konson. I hope you feel as hopeful as I do about the freedom and healing and beauty that comes when we embrace the fullness of our stories with compassion and curiosity. Your life matters, and so does your story, more than you know.